give me a nod when you want me to get going, Susie. Hello, everyone. I'm going to get going. I think my mic's working. Hi, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Norton from OUP, and I'm really delighted to welcome our second keynote speaker for this year's Redux conference, Sarah Ogilvie. She's a real catch, and we're getting her ahead of her appearance tomorrow at the Oxford Literary Festival. So Sarah is Senior Research Fellow in the Faculty of Linguistics, Philology and Phonetics at Oxford University and a Fellow of Campion Hall. She directs the MSc in Digital Scholarship. Before Oxford, she taught at Stanford and Cambridge universities and worked at Amazon's Innovation Lab in Silicon Valley. Sarah's research spans linguistics, lexicography and computer science, and her interests include endangered languages, corpus linguistics and digital humanities. She's also a specialist in digital tools and methods and co-author of Gen Z Explained, The Art of Living in a Digital Age in 2022, in which she applied computational linguistics to analyse the language and culture of young people aged 16 to 25 years. Our speaker knows OUP and by extension academic publishing well, being a former editor of the OED. Her large body of published work ranges impressively from the specialist to the commercial, an example of the latter being her 2023 book, The Dictionary People, the unsung heroes who created the Oxford English Dictionary, and it's the paperback of that book that Sarah's celebrating at the Literary Festival tomorrow. I'm excited to report that she is also writing a very short introduction to the OED for OUP. Sarah's keynote tunes into much of what we've heard and discussed today, asking where does publishing fit into the research cycle. She'll consider how publishers and researchers can collaborate to bring the wealth of data that results from digital research, and which rarely makes it into traditional publishing outputs, into reach for academic audiences and beyond. Please welcome Sarah to the podium.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm really delighted to be here. So about 10 years ago, I spent 2 years on secondment in Silicon Valley at Lab 126, Amazon's innovation lab, where the Kindle was created and where they develop their new products and services. I was there to help with the software in rolling out the Kindle in languages that use non-Roman script, such as Russian, Japanese, and Chinese. Those scripts made the dictionary feature on the Kindle particularly tricky, and I, as a specialist in dictionaries, it was my job to help solve that. It was a good time to be in Silicon Valley for 2 reasons. One, it felt like a small community. Of course, there was competition between the various tech companies. Our building was right next door to Apple's, and anyone with an office on that side of the building absolutely couldn't put their blinds up. You had to keep your blind down. But generally, you knew what was going on around you, and it felt like you were making a difference. The other reason why it was a good time to be in Silicon Valley was that companies were just beginning to realize the importance of the humanities and the value of our high-quality data. Content was king. And in fact, data was the new oil. Humanists had something to offer tech companies, not just our ability to create original data, but also our ability to create digital tools that could wrangle that data, which, because of the nature of the humanities, was often messy data, incomplete, fuzzy, and complicated data. Silicon Valley had conquered big data, but it was the nuances of data sets with gaps and problems that humanists could help them with. And we're now seeing the logical conclusion of that with the success of generative AI and the continued value of humanities data in training models, not least the recent revelation that Meta used pirated versions of that data on LibGen for training its AI. By looking at how a humanist does their research, I'd like to suggest that there are parts of the research cycle that are currently under-commercialized by publishers and researchers. Taken in isolation, one data set produced by a single scholar may seem trivial, but combined and curated with those of other scholars at the level of a university press and considered as part of a larger ecosystem, this data is highly sought after by not just other researchers, but also by those in industry, especially marketing and tech companies. As you will know, academic publishing has traditionally supported scholarship by certification of a scholar's work, acknowledging a scholar's authorship, helping to establish their reputation, and providing a permanent record of their scholarship. Also by validation of a scholar's work, quality assurance through rigorous peer review, as we've been hearing today, and established ethical standards. By dissemination, making it public, discovery, making outputs easy to find, and archiving, ensuring the long-term access, traditionally in collaboration with libraries. While this has been going on in the publishing world, scholars have been quite separate, engaging in their research cycle of deciding on a research question, designing a study, locating resources, collecting resources, analyzing them, writing up the research, and then finally publishing. So publishing has come at the end, as you'll know, as a monograph or an article in a journal or a chapter in an edited volume. With the application of digital tools and methods in the humanities, the research cycle remains the same, but the outputs have changed. I'm not talking about obvious changes to publishing, such as online creation, lossless copying, digital dissemination. I'm talking about the actual research by the scholar, the research methods, and the potential monetization of parts of that research. Rather than just collecting resources, scholars now curate them, and that curation produces scholarly outputs. As scholars, we apply all our learning and knowledge and expertise to manipulating and presenting digital resources in ways that a non-specialist could never do. We then apply innovative digital tools to make new knowledge and create new research questions, and we're able to answer questions that we never could do manually. And that research produces valuable outputs that are useful not just to other scholars, but to industry, especially tech and marketing companies who could use that data in their applications, products, and services. I'd like to suggest that we, scholars and publishers, are missing a trick by not commercializing the outputs of earlier steps in the research cycle. Outputs from the creation and curation of data sets and innovative software and digital tools developed in the analysis phase. We could be commercializing data sets, corpora, software, and digital tools. I thought we might just look at a couple of examples from my own research. The first one, we'll look at the iGen project, which Jacqueline mentioned, and then we'll go on and I'll show you just one other project, which is called Crowdsourcing the Oxford English Dictionary. So the iGen project is an interdisciplinary study of young people born after 1993, basically Gen Z. It was a collaboration with all of these people, especially my fellow co-authors and historian, all those people. My co-authors were an historian, a sociologist, an anthropologist, and I was the linguist, and each of us were looking at Gen Z from our own disciplines, collaborating and then writing together a final monograph in a single voice, which came out with the University of Chicago Press in 2022. Our research revealed a positive portrait of a generation that values authenticity and collaboration, that cares about their own well-being and mental health and that of others, and a generation that's invested in their own communities of identity, especially around gender and sexuality. And unlike previous generations, these markers for this generation are flexible, fluid, and changeable. As the linguist on the team, I was particularly interested in the language of Gen Z and what it tells us about their view of the world, their mindset, and their values. It was clear that this generation is writing and reading more than ever. They might be texting rather than using a pen and paper, but they're certainly being innovative in the process. Now, every parent in the room who has texted their child will know that even texting the simple word okay can be a minefield. These all mean very different things. What's happened is that Gen Z has developed ways of communicating tone in their texting. So should the communication be okay as a full word, okay as two separate letters, capital K, double K, single lowercase k, or something else? To a Gen Zer, these 5 responses communicate drastically different messages. A response of lowercase k with a full stop means you're in big trouble, for 2 reasons related to the perceived intentionality. First, the letter is lowercase, showing that the sender took time to undo the default capitalization that would automatically occur on your phone. And second, there's a full stop after the letter. If the sender took the extra time to personalize the response in this way, it must mean that they're not happy. In contrast, double K is positive and cheerful. It's a low-effort way of softening the curtness of a single letter. And those of you who have watched Adolescence on Netflix will know that the complexity of decoding emojis, which on the surface, such as these, to innocent parents may look jolly and fine, but in fact carry much darker meaning. The kidney bean is the self-identification marker of the incel, the involuntary celibate, a member of an online community of young men who blame women for the fact that they can't attract women sexually, similar to the coffee bean, which also has and is used to belittle women. The 100% represents the manosphere's theory of 80% of women being attracted to 20% of men, and that we are living in a female-dominated world for which the existence of men is under threat. So for them, it's the man's job to get fit, to get as attractive as possible, to make money, and then to manipulate, harm, and dominate women. All that in one simple emoji, which is also represented by the red pill, which signals misogynistic beliefs, a call to action by the manosphere who see the reality of the world and the truth about men and women. This, of course, comes from The Matrix, where you have the red pill, people who see reality clearly, and the blue pill, people who don't see reality clearly and who are blissfully ignorant, in this case, to the harm that women pose to the world. The dynamite is an exploding red pill, meaning that someone is an incel. The red heart sends a message of love. The purple heart lets the recipient know that you're horny. The yellow heart means that you're interested, and you send the message to that person, are you interested? An orange heart is just a reassuring, I'm fine and you're going to be fine. And a pink heart tells the recipient that you're interested but not in sex. So my first step to investigating the Gen Z language was to collect it. And the scraping, I did this, so I wanted to collect it, gather it all in one spot, and then analyze it. And so I created what became known as the iGen language corpus. This ended up being a 70 million word corpus, which includes interviews. We trained students at Stanford to interview other students, so we have hundreds of interviews. We also scraped social media sites. So we scraped Twitch, which is the gaming site, because we wanted to get gaming language. And in fact, we collaborated with Twitch. They were just bringing in moderators on their chatbot. And so they said, do you want to wait for the moderation, or do you want the data now? I said, no, I want the data now, because I wanted it to be as colorful as possible. So we got a lot of data from Twitch, from Twitter, from Reddit, from 4chan, which, as you'll know, is like it's known as the asshole of the internet, because it's where all the hackers hang out. It's where Anonymous hangs out. It's where the incels exist. But the language is raw, and it's, from a linguistic point of view, extremely colorful. And it takes probably about 5 years, because I've known about red pills for a decade. So it takes a while to get out of these sub-communities on 4chan, but it does eventually. And we combined that with time-aligned videos from YouTube, so that if there was a particular word that we were interested in, we could search through the corpus and it would take us to that very spot within the video. We could observe body language and other semiotic forms of communication. We also included memes, which are a huge part of Gen Z culture. And we also collected copy-pasters, which you may not know, but they are ironic respellings and translations of quite earnest posts. What I didn't anticipate was that this data, that it became highly sought after. When the book came out, I was approached by many marketing companies, tech companies, AI companies, and consultants whose clients included brands such as Coca-Cola and Nike, who were targeting this age group. In addition to this corpus, we developed digital tools with which to analyze and compare the language of this generation with that of the broader population. And those digital tools were also considered useful, not just to scholars, but to these companies. But what I'd like to consider today is that rather than Coca-Cola and Nike and their branding consultants coming directly to me as the author of these digital assets, why aren't they coming directly to academic publishers? If my contract with Chicago University Press had included my data and my digital assets and the outputs of those earlier stages of the research cycle, then the publisher could have sold it multiple times over. And they could have combined it with other digital assets from other publications within their group and curated valuable data packages for clients. And to push the idea even further, what's to stop publishers collaborating with each other, boosting your data offerings by merging digital assets and selling them to third parties directly? We're not talking about the final published product. We're talking about the curated data sets and digital tools developed by experts in the course of their research. If publishers were short on data pertaining to a subject area, they could boost their own offerings according to the client data needs. So authors will welcome it because they get to license or sell more of their work. I hope publishers would welcome it because it's another avenue source that supports the work of scholars. And third parties will welcome it because they can go to a trusted source for quality data. For example, the 70 million word data set and the digital tools from my project could be combined with the digital assets that helped create all these books on a similar topic published by Columbia University Press, Yale University Press, Michigan, McGill Queen's, London, Cambridge, and OUP. It might actually, you might think that this would really be probably the work of a startup or a data company, but I'm framing it in this way to be provocative and to spark some conversation in question time. So then the other project that I thought I'd show you is crowdsourcing the Oxford English Dictionary, because it seems to be a very traditional academic project, which many of you will know extremely well with your authors, but it actually has innovative digital research methods at the back end, which include digital assets such as data sets of people and words and data banks of images and portraits of people from the 19th century. It's a project that looks at all the people around the world who helped create the Oxford English Dictionary in the 19th century. And this project started as a completely nerdy academic project. Not only was I using digital tools along the way, but I was discovering really quirky and fascinating stories. And so I actually ended up publishing it as a trade book for a general audience. From the final book, the reader has no idea that there's a huge amount of tech at the back end. It produced digital outputs, data sets, and digital tools at all stages of the research cycle, which, to be honest, are not as useful to companies like Nike and Coca-Cola, but are certainly useful to other scholars. So, in our final 20 minutes, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about this project because it shows the range of possible clients for digital assets, from your corporate giants to the humble academic. As you'll know, the Oxford English Dictionary is the largest English dictionary in the world. This is the second edition that came out in 1989 in 20 volumes. But the edition that I was looking at is the first edition, which started in 1858, and they thought it would take 2 years to write. Then they thought it would take 10 years to write, and it ended up taking 70, finally finished in 1928. To sort of get the project, I just wanted to share with you that there are two types of dictionaries. There are synchronic dictionaries and there are diachronic dictionaries. And synchronic dictionaries are your little desktop dictionary, your Concise Oxford or your Collins dictionary that gives you a snapshot of language at a moment in time. The diachronic dictionaries are like the big Oxford English Dictionary. And the diachronic dictionary looks at a word across time, diachronos. Basically gives you the biography of every word. And what is particular about it is, I can use my pointer, or maybe I can't, is like your little desktop dictionary, you've got your head word, then your etymology, then your definition. But this bit, this quotation paragraph, is what makes the diachronic dictionary so special, because this shows you the very first time that that word was ever used in a written source. It then traces the word through the word's life until the current day when that dictionary was being created, in this case, 1881. And if you put yourself in the shoes of the lexicographer, you could imagine to just create that quotation paragraph is really difficult and extremely time-consuming. You know, imagine trying to find the first time that the word network had ever been used. In this case, they're saying that it's in 1560 in the Geneva version of the Bible. So when these three men first proposed the dictionary in 1858 to the Philological Society in London, they were proposing something quite radical. They were proposing for the first time to have a dictionary that wasn't a prescriptive dictionary like Samuel Johnson's dictionary 100 years before in 1755. They wanted to have a descriptive dictionary, and they wanted to collect all those quotations to show how people are actually using the language. But they realized that a small group of men in London or in Oxford couldn't do such a massive task alone. So they came up with the smart idea of crowdsourcing it. And they reached out to people all around the world through advertisements in newspapers and journals and through clubs and societies, through giving out leaflets in clubs and societies, and said, could you read your local books and write out your local words on little slips of 4 by 6 inch paper? This was just not within Britain, but this was throughout the United States, throughout the empire, and even beyond the empire. And they had no idea whether this would be a success or not. But in actual fact, so many people sent in slips that Royal Mail had to put a red pillar box outside the house of James Murray. This is him in his back garden shed. Here he is. And this is actually taken at 78 Banbury Road. So during your break, it's about a 10, 15 minute, no, probably just a 10-minute walk or 5-minute walk from here. So we're on Woodstock Road, but just go up to Banbury Road at number 78, and you will see that red pillar box. It's still there, and you'll see James Murray's house, which now has a blue plaque on it. He was trying to create the dictionary inside the family house. His long-suffering wife, Ada, said, James, there are too many papers and books and slips of paper here. You have to get out of the house. She pushed him out into the garden, which is where he built this shed, and he grandly called it the scriptorium. And it's kind of built into the ground, and you could imagine in winter it was dank and cold, and Murray and his editors had to wrap their legs in newspaper to stay warm. So I just wanted to show you what a classic slip looks like, because that's the key of what this project is all about. People would write out the head word that they were exemplifying with the quotation. Then they would write the date of the book, the author, the title, and the page number, and then the actual quotation. Sometimes people just cut out the books and stuck it on a piece of paper and sent it in. Now, all of these slips are still kept today. And if you go into the basement of Oxford University Press, you'll find them in hundreds of boxes, all classified alphabetically. And when I used to work as an editor on the dictionary, if I was revising an entry and I really was puzzled as to why Murray and his editors may have chosen something, I'd go down into the basement and find the slips pertaining to that word. It's one of my favorite places in Oxford. And we've never known who all those people are who sent in those slips. But down in that basement, there are over 2 million slips. So I always knew that this must have been a lot of people. So OUP didn't wait until 1928 to actually publish the dictionary. They are business savvy, of course, and they needed funds, so they published the dictionary in little chunks of the alphabet gradually from 1881 until 1928. And those little chunks of the alphabet are called fascicles. In the preface of each of those fascicles, James Murray sometimes thanked people. So if you go through all of those fascicles, and I have because I'm a nerd, and you count up all those people, there are only a few hundred people. But when I was down in that basement, I knew that there had to be more than a few hundred people. But we've never known who they were until 10 years ago. I was going to a new job at Stanford, and my visa was delayed, and I was stuck here for 2 weeks. So I thought I'll go visit my favorite places, one of which is that basement. And I was looking through some boxes, took the dusty lid off one particular box, and found a little black book in there that I'd never seen before, and it was tied with a cream ribbon. And when I opened it up, I immediately recognized James Murray's handwriting, and this book contained the names and addresses of all of those contributors. And not just their names and addresses, but every book that that person read, the number of slips per book, and the date that he had received them. And so when I looked at that, I thought two things. Terrific, we finally know who all those people were. And for me, that was a real moment, because a few years before that, I had published a book which had been a kind of history of the dictionary and its treatment of foreign words. And in that book, I would have loved to have known who all these people were. So when I saw that, I just thought, finally, we'll be able to know who they are. And then I also thought digital project, because Murray had been so particular and kept such a fantastic record, I knew that this would be a great project. So I went off to Stanford. They loved the project. They were very generous and funded me and a group of my students who also loved the project. And it turns out, actually, that there are 3,000 people. And so I didn't just find one address book, I found 3 address books belonging to James Murray. The following summer in the Bodleian, I discovered 3 belonging to Frederick Furnivall, who was his predecessor. So with these 6 address books and this group of wonderful students, we worked together. Basically, most of these people were unknowns. So that's a revelation about the OED, is that it's not a project of the scholarly elites. It's actually the majority of contributors were autodidacts, were amateurs. They were autodidacts just like James Murray himself. He had left school at 14. Most of these people had also left school at 14. And an abiding question of mine throughout the whole project was, what was motivating them to do this? And I gradually realized that I think it was that they were denied access. They were very smart, intelligent people. A huge amount of them were female, so we have 500 women. So, and as you know, they were denied access to education. And so this was an outlet for them, and a way for them to be associated with a privileged, prestigious place like Oxford. So, and the address books are just gorgeous in the sense that Murray writes little notes about people. When people die, he makes a note of that because he's corresponding with all of these people. When a lot of the women marry, he crosses out their surname, puts their maiden name, puts their new address. So when people aren't so good, so here you can see that Vernon Lushington is not so good, so he's got no good written across. And some of them have imposter or stole the book or hopeless. And in fact, when I was really struggling with how I was going to structure this book. I had no idea that it was going to be a book when I started, but I was just so curious, and I was discovering such wonderful, colorful people. I tried different structures, and then during the night it came to me, the alphabet, go A to Z. And so I wrote 26 small chapters. I could imagine the reader just reading a chapter before bed. And so there is one called H for Hopeless Contributor. And in fact, Karl Marx's daughter, Eleanor, is the star of that chapter. But I won't give it away in case any of you want to read it. But basically, from a research perspective, I broke down the address book because basically I wanted to cover every single little mark. And there were little like symbols and codes here. So I created fields for the data sets of the name, the addresses. I created 2 data sets, one for all the people, another for all the words and the books that they read. And the people's data set, of course, has 3,000 people and then has about 50 fields, because basically I wanted to find out not just where did they live, but where were they born, when were they born, what were their affiliations, what were their occupations, who did they love. I wanted to know as much as I could about them. So with these data sets, one on the people, also created images and portraits and built up a collection of those as well. So how are we going? I've still got 8 minutes. Terrific. So I'll just give you a little snapshot of some of the people. I started the book with A for archaeologist. I could have started it with A for Americans, since 15% of the people were from America, and we think of this as the prototypically British product, but in fact, no, there were so many Americans, and in fact, they struggled to get scholars within Britain to partake in this project, but scholars within the States did. So the quality of work coming from America was very high. But in fact, I started with A for archaeologist for this woman, Margaret Murray. And why I chose her is she was living in Calcutta, and she started to contribute to the dictionary as a teenager. She would wake up early in the morning, take a book off her mother's shelf. Most of them were traveller's tales. Go up to the roof while it was cool and write out slips from these books. So it's thanks to her that there are so many Indian English books in the first edition. B for best contributor. The best contributor is a man called Thomas Austin, who sends in 165,000 slips. The next best contributor sends in 156,000. And the top 4 contributors all have connections to psychiatric hospitals, which were known as lunatic asylums. The British census brought in a new column in 1871, which was for whether someone was deaf, blind, dumb, or a lunatic. So several of my people had lunatic there, and of course I followed up with the psychiatric hospitals that they were in. So there's a whole chapter on L for lunatic. And this is a letter that I found in the Huntington Library, where James Murray is writing to his predecessor, Frederick Furnivall, and says, Austin's is a painful case. And he tells the story of Thomas Austin, the man who sends in the most slips, coming to the door of the scriptorium, pleading for money and wanting to work within the scriptorium. And Murray was having none of it. This is P for pornographer. This is the man who lived in Bloomsbury, had the world's largest collection of erotica, and sends in all the sex words. This is Elizabeth Brown, one of the first female astronomers. Wanted to just point out this man because it has to do with what this talk is about. So one of my questions was, with this global network, who were the hubs within that network? Who were the most important people to the success of this project? And if you ask someone who knows a little bit about the dictionary, they'd probably say James Murray. If you ask someone who knows a little bit more, I probably would have said Frederick Furnivall, who was his predecessor, because he wore pink bow ties. He was this extrovert, one of these extraordinary Victorian characters, who certainly did bring a lot of people to the project. But if you apply graph theory and network analysis, someone completely different comes up. This man, Alexander John Ellis. So there are 2 measures that you can find out about a network. So these measures are what the Secret Service, the MI6 use when they're analyzing a terrorist cell and they want to see who's the most important person within the cell for them to take out. There's a betweenness measure that tells you who's connected to the most people. And there's something else, which is my favorite measure, called an eigenvector centrality measure. And that tells you who's connected to the most powerful people. And Ellis comes up as that. And so I was then able to bring his story into the book and focus on him, which not many, in fact, no other histories have really realized how important he was. And when I went deep into him, I realized, yes, it's thanks to him that Oxford University Press gets the contract. It's thanks to him that James Murray becomes the editor. So he was incredibly vital. Great. So just moving on, because I want to leave time for questions. Basically, the crowdsourcing project and the iGen project are just two examples of current humanities research that are firmly rooted in traditional scholarship, but draw on innovative digital tools and methods, and therefore create new digital assets through the research cycle. Because the question for me with respect to that data set of the dictionary people was, so that data is of interest to other scholars. I've actually had people write to me for information on their person. So there's someone writing a biography of Michael Field, the poet from the late 19th century who in fact was two lovers writing under a pseudonym, wanting to know what were the books that Michael Field read, and so I can look it up in the data set. I've had people writing on Charlotte Young, wanting to know what words did Charlotte Young send in, someone wanting to know who read the book Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. So these types of questions draw on the databases that I've created, and these informal relationships with other scholars have also extended to connections with the public. In the book, there were certain mysteries that I couldn't solve. For example, one of the biggest contributors to the dictionary was a man called Mr. Calland from the Netherlands, and he sub-edited more than half of the dictionary, an incredible feat. When he died, his wife writes this letter to Murray and refers to the dictionary as that wretched dictionary. So clearly this man devoted a lot of his time to it. And because they were very formal in their writing to one another, I never knew Mr. Calland's first name. It was just Mr. A. Calland. But sure enough, someone from the Netherlands who's read the book went to the little village where Mr. Calland lived and has found out that his name was Abraham. And then I've had 7 other people write and tell me that his name was Abraham. So thanks to the public, then I am able to update this database. But the question is, where does this database belong? How can this extraordinary data be best used for academic or public interest and research? Of course, I'm very happy to do that for now, but how can it be sustained across time? Is this something that a publisher would be interested in? Can it be monetized? How could this fit into the ecosystem that I am suggesting? Or does it just sit outside of that? These are the kinds of questions that I'd love to talk about in the question time. So I've suggested that the traditional publishing and research cycles might adapt to not just accommodate the new outputs of digital data sets and analyses, but actually to monetize them in ways that serve the scholar and the press. This is a call for academics to put the publisher front and center in their research cycle. And of course, for university presses to continue to meet the aims of academic publishing, to support scholarship, to acknowledge authorship, to establish reputation, to provide a permanent record of scholarship, to validate a scholar's work, to disseminate it, to make it discoverable, and to archive it for posterity, while at the same time putting the researcher front and center and valuing and monetizing all parts of their work. Thank you. Yes, time for questions. Yes, gentleman here.
Hi there. I'm Ross Mounts. I'm from Arcadia, which is a family charitable foundation. I think it's an interesting concept to monetize every single stage of the research cycle. The question is, who should benefit from that monetization? You seem to be suggesting that the publisher should be the first one with first dibs to exploit the financial value of research. But my understanding of most universities in the UK is that they're publicly funded institutions. So ought the taxpayer not to get first dibs on this? Or I agree, research digital assets have value, tremendous value, but but I don't understand why the academic would immediately give away that value to the publisher.
So thank you for your question. It's great, and I'd love other publishers here to respond. Just from my perspective, I see that it's both the publisher and the scholar who will benefit. And just as today, when academics are paid for their monograph and they receive royalties personally, this would just be the same as that. But the author would probably, well, there are different models. You could license it, or you could just include it within your contract. Yeah. But please, if there's a publisher who could answer that better than me, I'm sure, please. There's someone up there. Yeah.
Jessica from University of Toronto Press. Thank you for the talk. It was wonderful. To Ross's point, I think as publishers, we're already viewed quite negatively when it comes to monetizing anything. So I'm just curious, because I see where you're going. And part of the, and it's brilliant, part of the aspect of AI and LLMs to me is the amount of content that's required. So the data sets piece is very, very interesting, and actually gets to some of the earlier comments about we always publish the results that are, we don't publish the things that don't get to the results that people are looking for. So it'd be wonderful to capture that. But I can't help thinking the sort of academic library, the institution itself might be a better place with the skill set from the publisher. But do you know of any, because then you get cross-publisher, cross-discipline, you get away from the argument that the publishers are only in this for money, which I would argue we are not. But do you see any experimentation there? Academic libraries, I feel, is a place where there might be some interesting experiments to be had.
Yeah, it's a fantastic idea, and I do think that there are collaborations going on with the Bodleian. I used to serve on the as a curator on their board, so I am familiar that there are publishers who are looking to collaborate. There are certainly like Google, as you know, has been collaborating with libraries around the world to scan their books for the Google Books project. But more recently, Oxford, I know, has just done a collaboration with OpenAI about sharing resources, and the Bodleian, I think, are in conversation with publishers and other tech companies. So I think it started, but I'm not part of that, so I don't know.
Sorry to further on this, but I think funding is such an issue for libraries, for universities, and libraries they acquire our content. So if there could be a monetary aspect of what the libraries are doing, I just feel like that might be another funding model.
Absolutely.
I'm just curious whether... Yeah, anyway.
Thank you so much.
Just following on from that, to give a transatlantic perspective, one example of libraries monetizing academic content is at Harvard. So Harvard have this new innovation that's coming from the Harvard Library Innovation Lab, and it's called Harvard IDI, the Harvard Institutional Data Initiative. And I think they're planning to work with OpenAI, Google, all the big tech companies on how academic institutions can best serve up data in the formats that AI company needs for AI training. So I think that speaks a little bit to the comments over there about how libraries could be the source of where this happens. And it is to get that money that should rightly be paid by those that are doing AI training back to the creators of that resource. But I do think personally that maybe it should be libraries getting paid for this rather than publishers, but that's just my personal opinion.
Thank you, Ross. Oh, yes, we have another.
Thanks. Thanks for a really interesting talk. I was wondering if there's like a chicken egg aspect here of like this lack of motivation to monetize is related to a devaluing of that work before it becomes published. I was in the panel earlier about how we can help authors to communicate impact. And I think like there is a lot of focus on impact, right? And so like if you just collect and create a data set, right, that it's hard to measure the impact of what that project will go on to do, whereas it's much easier to talk about the impact of a published piece of writing. And so I wonder if there is, it's university presses often, I think, follow the academic lead rather than lead. And so maybe that is, that devaluing is part of the issue.
Interesting, thanks. Yeah, and I also wonder, though, whether it's just that the need for data is a relatively new thing. So, in fact, it's just that we haven't considered this, or that there hasn't been that business need for it until now. So now it might be the time to really get going and be a part of it and make the change, or at least just put forward the business case that companies are then forced to fall into. I don't know. But I'd love to know how viable this sounds to people in publishing. So I think we've got 2 more minutes before the prize giving, so perhaps just one more question. No? Oh yes, here. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to stumble over my words here a bit because it's still forming in my head, but
Yeah.
thinking about research integrity, which we've talked about a lot today, it occurs to me that a lot of humanities researchers might not be aware of the potential value that they're creating when they begin a project, and how the uses of the data that they collect may not be imagined at the beginning of that project, and how that might lead to research integrity challenges as the project evolves and those potential uses, those commercial applications become apparent. I suppose the question is, what do humanities students and postdocs and researchers need to learn about? What do they need to get in place before they think about these projects that might become valuable to the likes of Coca-Cola, like you said?
Yeah. So I'm thinking that scholars would probably hold on to this data until they're satisfied with their outputs and their publications, so that then once the monograph is out, that it would be at that stage that they would then distribute and disseminate these earlier parts of the research cycle. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all so much. Great.
Thanks so much, Sarah. You really entertained us, as well as picking up a lot of the things we've been talking about all day. Thank you so much. So I'm handing over now to Wayne Syme, who's Chief Executive of ALPS. He's going to take it from here.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for such an interesting and excellent session. We now move on to our first University Press Rising Star Award presentation. I'd like to introduce Will Crook from the Publishing Licensing Services, our sponsors for the award, to present this to our winner, Sam Johnson from Edinburgh University Press. Would Will and Sam like to come forward? The initiative, Sam, for the panel, were particularly impressed with the innovation and initiative Sam has demonstrated throughout his time with Edinburgh University Press, particularly in mentorship, being an active member of the team and championing a publishing internship scheme. So. many congratulations again to Sam. Thank you so much for attending day one of the conference. We've had some interesting sessions, and as you've asked some great questions, it's been great to see the University Press community together in such a wonderful setting. A very special thank you to our keynote speakers, chairs and panellists. Your sessions have been compelling, thought-provoking and relevant. Please do stay for the drinks reception, which is kindly sponsored by the Association of University Presses. This is being held outside in the mezzanine area. And for those attending the Scholarly Social, I hope you enjoy your evening. Tomorrow's sessions will begin at 9:30 with Plenary 3, Scale Wins. How can small publishers survive and thrive? I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you.